Hello everyone, my name is David Oni. Welcome to another segment of academic excellence and intellectual brainstorming. My YouTube name is David Oni Wiz. You can actually subscribe to our channel, click the notification button, leave a comment, and on how to serve you better in each and every lecture we give on this forum. Today we're going to look at government, and we're going to look at government. Today we're looking at government. We're going to look at what we call fascism, oligarchy, totalitarianism, and Nazism. Nazism. So these are the topics that we're going to look at. The first one is oligarchy. The second one is fascism. The third one is totalitarianism, and the fourth one is what we call Nazism. So we're going to take them one after the other if time actually permits us. But we're going to define first of all what is a oligarchy. Oligarchy can be defined as the government of the few privileged and powerful people. Government of the few privileged and powerful people. So when you're talking about oligarchy, you are referring to the government of the few privileged and powerful people. Government of the few privileged and powerful people is what we refer to as a oligarchy. Government of the few privileged and powerful people. So what are we saying here? What we're saying here is that an oligarchy government is a selfish government. Oligarchy government is a selfish government. It's a selfish government because the government takes care of only the interest of its members at the expense of the majority. So oligarchy government is a selfish government because it takes care of only its members at the detriment of the majority. And that's why we said oligarchy is a government of the few privileged and powerful people. In other words, such a government will only cater for only the interest of its members only, not the interest of the majority. So there's what we call the iron law of oligarchy. Iron law of oligarchy. Iron law of oligarchy. What do we mean by iron law of oligarchy? By the iron law of oligarchy, we're saying here that the government only caters for the interests of its members, and apart from that, it makes it difficult for anybody to attain that level of oligarchy. In other words, what we're saying here is that there is actually something like this that is covering only the elite, and because there is a covering here or an iron here covering them, it is very difficult for the majority or the poor to get to the level of the oligarchy because of the iron law of oligarchy. So the iron law of oligarchies is an iron that protects and make sure that only the interest of the members of elite are protected under the iron. So there is an iron law of oligarchy, and that's why it is very, very difficult for the masses to actually attain the level of what of the oligarchy, except there is a changes in what we call social stratification. Social stratification. Social 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 stratification. Social stratification. Unless there is changes in what we call social stratification. Social stratification. So then we can say that what that the masses of the poor can attain the level of what of the oligarchy. So there is an iron law of oligarchy. So what we're saying here is that the oligarchy government only caters for the interests of its members only at the expense of what of the majority. So an oligarchy government is a selfish government. Now let us now quickly look at what we call types of oligarchy. 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 The first one, we have what we call aristocracy. Aristocracy. The second one is called plutocracy. Plutocracy. The third one is called gentocracy. Gentocracy. The fourth one is called theocracy. Theocracy. Number 5, autocracy. Number 6, we have plutocracy. Then we have number 7, diarchy. Diarchy. So the first one is what we call aristocracy. What is aristocracy? Aristocracy is the government of the few individuals with the highest level of social rank. It is the government of the few individuals with the highest level of social rank. What are we saying here? What we're saying here is that this individual, they constitute the elite and they have the highest level of intellectual capability and they hold all answers to all questions. In other words, these individuals are the nobles. They are the nobles. So they are aristocrats. They are aristocrats. They have the highest level of social rank in the society, which makes them to be noble, and they have the highest level of intellectual capability because of what? Because of their nobility. So when we talk about that, we're talking about what we call aristocracy. Number 1, aristocracy. Then the second one is what we call plutocracy. Plutocracy, which is this one, plutocracy. When you're talking about plutocracy, you are talking about the government of the few rich individuals and powerful people. We are talking about what? The government of the few rich individuals and powerful people. There's a difference between aristocracy and what? And plutocracy. Under plutocracy, you have the government of the few rich individuals and powerful people. That is what we call a plutocratic government. So a plutocratic government constitutes what we call a plutocracy. So what we're saying here is that the so-called financiers and the so-called landlords and industrialists, they form under the plutocratic government. They fall under what we call plutocratic government. They fall under plutocratic government. That is plutocracy for you. That's number 2, plutocracy. Plutocracy. Now, those that constitute the plutocracy, they hold political power and they also control what we call economic resources. So under plutocratic government, those individuals, they hold political power and they also constitute what we call, and they also have what we call economic resources. They have economic power and political power joined together. Economic power and what? And 2, political power. Then gentocracy is the government of the old people. When you have old individuals or group of people that are old, coming together to form a government, you are referring to a plutocratic government. So a plutocratic government is a government of the whole people, like in Nigeria. Sorry to use that word. So a plutocratic government is a government of what? Of the whole people. When you have these old people coming together to constitute a government or to form a government where majority of them are what? Are old people, then you call them what? Gentocratic government. Then we have what we call theocratic government or theocracy. By theocracy, we are talking about the government of the priest. When you have the so-called priest or religious individuals coming together to form a government, you refer to such a government as a theocratic government. It is a theocratic government because of what? Because of their religious background. So when you have religious people or individuals coming together to form a government, you refer to it as what? As a theocratic government. So they believe that everything that they do is ordained by God, but that God is what is the one that's actually what directing them on what to do, on how to run the government, theocratic government. Then you have what we call autocratic government. When you talk about autocratic government, you are referring to an authoritarian government. A government that is authoritarian is an autocratic government. Authoritarianism is also the same thing as autocracy, or you can call it totalitarianism. It is still the same thing. So autocracy and authoritarianism is the same thing. So when one individual group of people they wield absolute power or they exercise absolute power, you're referring to them as an autocratic government. Autocratic government. Then number 6 is what we call a kleptocracy. When you have a group of individuals that comes to power in order to siphon, to embezzle, to loot, to steal a country's economic resources by diverting such economic resources or money into their own personal pocket or what? Or into their own personal purse. You refer to such a government as a kleptocratic government. It is a government of what? Of thieves. So when you have plutocratic government, you're talking about a government where majority of them are what? Are thieves. They are stealing, siphoning, embezzling a country's economic resources into their own personal purse. Then you say that such a government is a kleptocratic government. Then we also have what we call diarchy. Diarchy. When you say that a government is diarchy, is a diarchy government, you are referring to a government where you have joint rulership, where you have a military government and a civilian government ruling together. Then you see that such a government is a diarchy. Like in 1993, under President Ibrahim Babangida, Nigeria adopted a diarchy system where you have the military head of state, who is what? The president, and you also have some individuals who are civilians working together with him in such an administration in 1993. So such a system of government is called a diarchy. So a diarchy government is a government that has both civilian and military in power ruling together, and that's why I use the word joint rulership. So on that note, we are done with what we call the oligarchy. We're moving to the second one, which is called the fascism. Fascism. We're moving to what we call fascism. What is fascism? Fascism. Fascism. Fascism can be defined as a philosophy, principle, and organization of the aggressive nationalist and anti-communist dictatorship. And anti-communist dictatorship. So when you talk about fascism, you are referring to a philosophy, principle, and organization of aggressive nationalist and anti-communist dictatorship. When you define it like that, you are referring to what we call fascism. So fascism is a philosophy, is a principle and organization of the aggressive nationalist and anti-communist dictatorship. That is what we call fascism. Or you can call it fascist. A fascist is a what? Is somebody that has what? The ideology or the principle or philosophy of fascism. So a fascist is a person that has what? The philosophy, the principle, and ideology of what? Of fascism. You understand? That is a fascist. So fascism actually developed under the man called Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini. Now, in 1922, fascism came up in 1922 and was dissolved in 1943. Now, the concept and the philosophy of fascism was developed by the man called Benito Mussolini. Now, for those of us that have learned history or we know a bit about history, you know the man they call Benito Mussolini. He was a fascist. He was one of the most totalitarian, aggressive, leadership or a dictatorial leadership that Italy has ever produced in the year 1922. Eventually, in 1943, Benito Mussolini and his mistress were actually killed in Italy. Though he was rescued by the man called the Adolf Hitler, but immediately they captured him the second time. They wasted no time in killing him and turning his head upside down with his mistress in the year 1943. So with the death of Benito Mussolini, fascism came to an end in 1943 after the death of Benito Mussolini in 1943. Now, what are the principles, what are the factors, or what are the characteristics or features of fascism? So we quickly look at that. Features of fascism. Features of what? Of fascism. Number one, it is an aggressive nationalism. Number two, it is an anti-communist dictatorship. It is an anti-communist dictatorship. Number three, it repudiates capitalism and socialism. Number four, it glorifies war. Number five, according to the fascist, to have everlasting peace, there must be war. There must be war. There must be war. Number six, it does not believe in the existence of God. It does not believe in the existence of a God. So, it does not believe in the existence of a God. So, these are some of the characteristics of fascism. It is an aggressive nationalism. It is an anti-communist dictatorship. It repudiates capitalism and socialism. It glorifies war. And according to the fascists, to have everlasting peace, there must be war. And number six, it does not believe in the existence of a God. Then, if possible, we can add more. We can say that Number seven, absence of the rule of law. Number eight, the press is controlled by the state. The press is controlled by the state. So these are characteristics of what we call fascism. So we said that fascism is an aggressive, is a philosophy, is a principle of the organization of what? Of aggressive nationalists and anti-communist dictatorship, and it was started by the man they called Benito Mussolini in 1922 to 1943 when he was killed by his own people, by the peasants or the farmers or the lower people in his country. They killed him during that time, and that period was actually during the Second World War. And we also mentioned the characteristics. We said that number one, he does not believe in God. He repudiates capitalism and socialism. That he does not believe in the existence of God. That the government owns all power. It wields all power. It wields all social, political, and economic power. It does not allow for opposition. We've mentioned a lot of them, about eight characteristics of fascism here. Like number 8, we said that the press is controlled by the state. Then number 7, we said there is an absence of rule of law. And you know that when a state does not have the rule of law, that means that there is no fundamental human right. In such a state, the government controls everything. The government holds the key to the life of the people. The state, the resources, and everything belongs to the people. So the rule of law is one of the fundamental principles of democracy. A country without a rule of law is a dictatorial state. So in every state there must be rule of law, because the rule of law will guarantee the liberties and freedom of the people. But under Benito Mussolini in fascism, such a thing does not exist. It does not allow for individual initiative. That means that the government owes all answer to all questions. In other words, a fascist government is a dictatorial government, is a totalitarian government, is an autocratic government, is an authoritarian government. That's what we're saying there. So that's all about fascism. So we're going to move to what we call totalitarianism. 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 Now, what is totalitarianism? It can be defined as a system where one individual owns or group owns all absolute power and does not allow for opposition and does not allow for opposition. So when you're talking about a totalitarian government, you're talking about a system where one individual or a group of people holds all absolute power and does not allow for opposition. So when you're talking about such a system of government, you are talking about a totalitarian government or an autocratic government or an authoritarian government. So totalitarianism, authoritarianism, and autocracy are all the same thing. So, or dictatorialism, or dictatorial system of government, or dictatorial system of government. So totalitarianism, dictatorship, authoritarianism, and autocracy or an autocratic government is the same thing as what? As a totalitarian government. So in other words, such a government is a dictatorial government, is an autocratic government, is a kind of a government that does not allow for any form of opposition in the society. So such a government does not allow for any form of opposition. Very, very important. Now, what are the characteristics of what we call totalitarianism? Characteristics of totalitarianism. Characteristics of totalitarianism. Number 1, we say it does not allow for opposition. Number 2, censorship of the press. Number 3, absence of the rule of law. Number 4, it does not allow for individual initiative. Number 5, existence of one dominant party in the state. Existence of one dominant party in the state. Number 6, autocratic or authoritarian form of government. Number 7, one ideological direction or philosophy in the states. So these are the characteristics of totalitarianism. Characteristics of totalitarianism. Number 1, we said it does not allow for opposition. Number 2, censorship of the press. That means that the press is gagged. There's no freedom of the press. That means that every actions of the press must be subjected to the approval of what? Of the state. And that does not augur well for such a society. So the press does not have freedom. The press is actually censored. Then number 3, absence of the rule of law. There's no rule of law under a totalitarian state because the government rules arbitrarily. The government rules arbitrarily. The government does not rule according to the constitution, or the government is not constitutional. The government does not follow the constitution. The government rules abrogatorily. The government rules according to what? According to its own whims and caprices without any form of opposition. Then it does not allow for individual initiative. Number 5, the existence of one dominant party in the state. Number 6, autocratic or authoritarian form of a government. And number 7, one ideological direction or philosophy in the state. So those are the characteristics of what we call totalitarianism. Now let us quickly look at what we call Nazism. Now, Nazism is another, form of totalitarianism. Nazism is another form of totalitarianism. So in other words, totalitarianism, you can use the definition of what? Of totalitarianism for the definition of what? Of Nazism. So you can use the definition of what? Of totalitarianism for the definition of Nazism. So Nazism is another form of totalitarianism. And when you're talking about Nazism, Nazism was actually a concept that developed under the man called Adolf Hitler. It was actually a concept that actually started under the man called Adolf Hitler in 1933 and died in the year 1945. So Nazism started under the man called Adolf Hitler. Is also the same thing as totalitarianism, as I've already stated earlier. So when you see the word Nazism, is also totalitarianism, but it's another form of totalitarianism under the man called Adolf Hitler in 1933. Adolf Hitler was the leader of Germany during that time. Adolf Hitler was the leader of Germany during that time. Just like the way Benito Mussolini was the leader of Italy during that time under fascism, and Joseph Stalin of Russia was the leader of Russia, Union of what? Of the Soviet Socialist Republic during that time under communism. So Joseph Stalin adopted communism, Adolf Hitler adopted Nazism, and Benito Mussolini adopted fascism. So these are three different ideologies. Three different ideologies. Nazism was under Adolf Hitler. Under Benito Mussolini, we have fascism. And under Joseph Stalin, we have what we call communism. And you could remember the role these three people played during the Second World War. They played a very, very dominant role during the Second World War, during that time, from 1939 to 1945. From 1939 to 1945, the whole world was engulfed in what? In Second World War, where millions of people lost their lives. So Adolf Hitler developed the concept of Nazism in 1933 to 1945. And what are the characteristics of what we call Nazism? Number one, the state controls everything. The state controls everything. Number two, it believes in the superiority of the German race. Number four, use of coercion to achieve the whims and caprices of the state. Number four, one ideology for the state. One ideology for the state. Number five, absence of opposition. Number six, existence of one party, that is Nazi National Party. Nazi National Party. So these are the characteristics of what we call Nazism. Number one, we state that the state controls everything. Then number two, it believed in the superiority of the German race. If you remember, one of the reasons why the Second World War actually took place was because of the superiority of the belief in the German race over other races. That is, they have more superior races, and other races are actually inferior races, most especially the Jews during that time. I can remember a lot of Jews were killed during this period of the Second World War, during the period of what we call the Holocaust. Then number three, the use of coercion to achieve the means and capacities of the state. That is what we say when we say use of coercion. We're saying that the government uses force. It uses aggressive force, strong force, to achieve its whims and caprices, to achieve its aims and their objectives. That is, the government superimpose itself on the people. So it does not allow for any form of opposition or any form of individual initiatives. You understand? So there's a centrally planned government, where the government is the only government that can exercise supreme legal authority within that territorial jurisdiction. And for that reason, any other form of opposition is actually silenced or destroyed under what we call Nazism. So then number four, one ideology for the state. And what is that ideology? Nazist ideology for the state. So the state has, I practice what we call the Nazist ideology in that particular period of time. Then there's just one party. And what is that party? The Nazi National Party. So it's the only party that is recognized in the state. It is the only party that is recognized in the state. And if you remember, Adolf Hitler came to power through this Nazi National Party. And when he came into power, he began to exercise in his own wisdom and authority to dominate other races, because he believes that the German races are actually the more superior races. And apart from that, he wanted to avenge the shame, the defeat of the Germans during the First World War in 1914 to 1918. He felt that the Germans were not treated well, that the Germans were being cheated during that war, that the armistice that was held in that time, the agreement that was held in that time, was not in the interest of the Germans, because the Germans were made to pay repatriation during that particular time. So he felt this was not supposed to be. So during that period, when he came to power, he began to modernize the German army. And you know what happened after that? There was conflagration all over the whole world because of this. Then there's this one party we mentioned now. The number 5, which number 5? Absence of opposition. There's no opposition under Nazism. There's no form of opposition under Nazism. So today we have been able to cover 4, very important topic. We've looked at what we call oligarchy. We said that it's the government of of the few privileged and powerful people. We mentioned types of oligarchy. We mentioned the plutocracy, aristocracy, kleptocracy, genetocracy, fascism. Theocracy. We also diarchy and the rest of them. There are all types of oligarchy. Then we also mentioned fascism. We said that fascism is is a philosophy or a principle of the organization of aggressive nationalists and the anti-communist dictatorship that was under Benito Mussolini in 1922 to 1943, after the demise of a man called Benito Mussolini. I will mention the characteristics. It predates the existence of capitalism and socialism. It glorifies war. It does not believe in God. It believes that there's only one ideology for that state, and that ideology was the fascist ideology, and so many other factors like that. It does not allow for opposition, that the press is controlled by the state, and so many other factors like that. We also mentioned what we call totalitarianism. We said totalitarianism also was the same thing as authoritarianism or autocracy. Now, when you talk about totalitarianism, you are referring to autocracy or authoritarianism or dictatorship. Then we define totalitarianism. We said that totalitarianism is a system of government whereby one individual or a group of people holds all absolute power without any form of opposition. And we also mentioned the characteristics of totalitarianism. Then the last one is what we call Nazism. We said that Nazism actually started in 1933 to 1945 under the man called Adolf Hitler, under Nazism. And we mentioned the characteristics. We said it does not believe in, we said that under Nazism, that the state controls everything, that there's only one ideology for the state, there's only one existence of one political party, does not allow for opposition and the rest of them. So all these are what we have studied today. I believe you have gained a lot today. I remain your humble and loyal servant, David Oni. And my YouTube channel is actually David Oni Wiz. You can subscribe to this channel so that we can bring you more and more interesting topic every time. You can subscribe to this channel, David Oni Wiz, and also leave your comments and leave your notifications so that whenever we will come out with one or